Will Young, who's the Assistant Head of HSC Leadership Centre in Northern Ireland. And his work has been as an organisational development consultant, and he's now currently working with the HSC Leadership Centre to provide OD and leadership support to the Northern Ireland Health and Social Care and the Northern Ireland Fire and Service Rescue. And he's going to talk to you about reflecting, reviewing and reimagining. So welcome, Will. I'll hand over.
Hey, Rachel.
Hello.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, folks. And again, thanks for the opportunity today, folks, to share some of our learnings from here in Northern Ireland. I have to remember to slow down a wee bit, just in case I generally tend to speak a bit fast and I've pretty much a bit to get through. So hopefully you can see my slides now, but as Rachel says, Assistant Head here at the Leadership Centre, we provide organisational leadership development support to the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service, as well as our 6 trusts, the Northern Ireland Ambulance Service, and also our arm's length bodies here. I suppose we also collaborate quite a lot with our health and social care colleagues around the areas, especially Scotland, England, Wales and the south of Ireland, and also probably work alongside a lot of our academic institutions and other public services. So again, we provide a range of consultancy support, but also learning and development support to the system. And as Rachel says today, I suppose it was about me reflecting and reviewing and reimagining learning development in our experience over the last 18 months of the pandemic. And I suppose I put this up because when asked to do this, I thought, oh my goodness, wonder what I'm going to cover. And actually just taking time out for even myself to reflect over the last 18 months of the system and what we've done as a centre has been really, really insightful for me. So it's just proven for me that even we as learners need to, and learning and development consultants need to take our time off to actually think about what we're doing and how we're doing it. So what I plan to do with you is just very briefly reflect quickly on our journey. So what did our journey over the 18 months look like? Review some of my observations and what I noticed, really, I suppose, in that reflection, and then sort of some reimagination about what do we think our future perhaps could look like, really. So I suppose, excuse me, on reflection, I suppose, what did our journey look like? I suppose for me, this is what it looked a wee bit like at the start. It was a bit like that night out and getting up the following morning and not really knowing where I was, what I was doing, etc., and looking probably a wee bit rough for it. And I suppose that's what really the last 18 months here in health and social care in Northern Ireland has felt like. I suppose like many of you in health right across the regions and nations, it's been a similar picture for us all. I suppose we, similar to the other regions, went into our lockdown in March last year. And I suppose that's when we sort of felt, oh my goodness, what are we doing? There was many of our clients all stopped or drilled down some of their learning and development activities. But I suppose we at the centre had originally thought about that, but I suppose we then took a stance of, actually, you know what, we need to work for the system at this point in time. We need to support the system. Whilst many of our colleagues in our trusts and organisations were being redeployed, our L&D people were being redeployed, we thought, you know what, we need to step forward here and support them and support their work whilst they're off having to do other things on the front line, really. So I suppose for us, it was about, leadership was not all about us at the centre, it was much more about how do we support our system and other systems moving forward. I suppose I put this in because whilst we didn't know what we were doing, we knew we needed to take some sort of steps and move forward. And it was a tiptoe right at the very start. We had to start off very, very slowly, but we had to be brave enough to do some of that, I suppose. I suppose right at the start, we sort of realised, and Maron's maxim, Maron Rogers, anyone who's read any of his work is I suppose, a systems guru, and these are his maxims. And two of them, I suppose, resonated with me when I was thinking about this, about at the time we were trying to connect the system to more of itself, knowing that it wouldn't have time to do that for itself. But also we just needed to start doing stuff, and start anywhere, followed everywhere seemed pretty a good thing at the time. Let's just do something. The system needs help. And what do we do? So I suppose within a matter of weeks from that period of being really strangled and paralysed and rabbits and headlights sort of things, we thought, you know what, we need to start providing stuff for our system. So early on in April, so within a matter of a few weeks, and this is an organisation who had done some digital learning through e-learning. We hadn't done very little digital learning in terms of our programs, etc., like I suppose many of our L&D colleagues. But we needed to move very quickly to a virtual world, virtual delivery of material, more bite-sized material, etc. So we came up with this concept of doing the Take 5 Steps to Leadership. So we started to run a webinar series, which primarily were 5 webinars over a 2-week period, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We would run the webinars 3 times a day. So we ran the same webinar at 10 a.m. in the morning, 3 p.m. in the evening, and 8 p.m. in the evening, again, trying to give us maximum amount of exposure and learning for people as possible. So we started our first series, and these are just, again, the examples of the first series. We actually ended up doing 5 series of webinars over the period from April right through to July, and I'll share with you even the evolution of those through that period. But after each of those webinars, we ran them, they were open source, we put them on Eventbrite, anyone, so even that, we didn't keep them to health and social care, we opened them up, and I'll share with you some of the statistics and some of the data later about who actually accessed these. For each of those webinars, we did the session for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and we also give them a 5 top tips to take away as well. So each of the sessions were just bite-sized learning pieces with these subsequent materials to go with them after them. As I say, we thought we may only do those for a while, but we ended up running these for probably around about 3 months post the lockdown, and because actually we found that there were actually quite a big demand for them really. So we did those for the first 3. Series 4, then we started to focus on, so in Northern Ireland, we have a collective leadership strategy. So by series 3, so recognizing that series 3 we'd already done 5 sets of webinars 3 times a day, we moved to series 4 and we started to go to 1 a week, and we called it Webinar Wednesdays. We then started to look at doing those and delivering these 1 day every week, and we actually started to use them around the 4 elements of our collective leadership strategy, which talks about compassionate leadership, teams really, systems leadership, and responsibility of leadership at all levels. So we took one of those topics every week and we ran a webinar. Again, from the data we got, we changed the timings this time of the webinars. So we started to do them at 10:30 in the morning, 3 p.m. and 7:30 in the evening. Wednesdays seemed to also, from the data, show that that was the best days. Mondays weren't taken up as much. So I suppose all through this, I suppose the key thing is, as a learning organisation, we were also learning and getting the data to tell us what should we be doing, where should we be focusing our attention, and who was actually accessing our materials and services. So as I say, we started to move these around: authentic leadership, empowering others, collaboration, communication. All of the topics then started to move around our collective leadership strategy. This is just a snapshot then of what we did during those first 3 months of COVID and lockdown. And again, you can see sort of 23 programs or webinars, sessions during that period. And this was an organisation who had never done this stuff before. So as I say, there was quite a lot of learning for us. First 3 were focused around just general leadership period things and topics and what people might actually need during that period. And as I say, series 4 and 5 very much linked into back to our strategy around our collective leadership strategy in Northern Ireland. So I suppose for us, on reflection, really, we did follow that adult learning cycle. We were in a very much a nice equilibrium coming into March 2020, and then suddenly COVID hit. There was complete disorientation in the centre, complete disorientation in HSC and I in terms of what we would do in terms of the learning environment and in terms of development within our system. But I suppose we quickly as a centre moved through that. Well, let's explore what else could we do? What do we need to do? And we had to reorientate ourselves into this new world, I suppose, like many. So these are some bullet points on my reflections of that journey, I suppose. We went through that adult learning cycle and probably did that a number of times. We knew we had to keep delivering and developing our system capacity, because our staff were being redeployed everywhere. And when I talk about our staff, I mean the 67,000 that we have in Health and Social Care, Northern Ireland, and the Northern Ireland Fire and Rescue Service. They would be busy doing other stuff. So the staff and the system needed our support. But even us at that time, we didn't fully understand how or where and when we could do it, really. So we did focus on the needs of the system and not our staff. We did have to retain our own staff because we were being pushed to redeploy our own organisational staff, and we knew that if we redeployed our staff, we wouldn't be able to deliver the services to the rest of the system. But that also meant that we needed to retrain our staff because, as I say, they weren't digital learning consultants, they were learning and development consultants in a purely standard traditional learning and development way. But in a very quick period of time, we had to get them skilled up in digital technology. We needed to be strong and influence our organisation because, again, our organisation wanted to redeploy us, wanted us to stand down. We had to influence our IT because there was many of the technologies that we didn't have that we needed. And that also brought in the influence of a procurement because very quickly we needed to get technologies and platforms in place that we could do the work that we needed to do and equipment that we needed. So that wasn't easy either. But again, I suppose the bottom line was we needed to be bold, take risks. And all of that, we didn't know what would work, what wouldn't work. We tried those Take 5, we didn't know whether they would take off or not. So we had to be curious, but also agile enough to take the feedback and move on. We were able to provide shorter bite-sized material, which wasn't our norm. And I suppose for me, our learning system had been turned on its head. Our people had gone, the processes were very different, and even our environment in terms of how we delivered was very, very different. It was a different world, really. I suppose, so what did we notice now back on reflection, coming off that hamster wheel? I suppose anyone who knows Covey's work, the 7 habits, when you look down these, we were proactive. We did begin with the end in mind, in that we knew that we had to do something and we needed to keep that development going. And we had to put first things first. We scrapped all of our typical learning and development courses and our material and had to start with things that would actually help the workplace, really. So how do we deal with virtual teams? How do we deal with virtual team meetings? So we had to go back to basics with some things, but also refocus really on some of that. The data, I suppose, was really interesting. And I suppose this is some of the data from our first 4 series, and then primarily when I take into our first 5. So I suppose our series 5, and that's why we took the decision after 5 to stop the webinar series, because we started to see a decrease because our system had started to come out of lockdown. Our people had started to be moving back into their own working ways. Our L&D departments started to come back online. But as you can see, during that short period, we had over nearly 3,000 people who had registered, and that doesn't include the people who had watched the webinars, because we also recorded every webinar that we had done. That doesn't include the people who had watched the webinars offline. You see the data, we were still getting pretty much equal amounts of people coming in the morning and the afternoon, not so many in the evening, which wouldn't be untypical, but it also showed an untapped resource. We wouldn't normally, and again, maybe it's different in other regions, but typically L&D in Northern Ireland for health and social care tends to be around a 9 to 5 service, Monday to Friday. We can see here that there is definitely a need for evenings and people outside of that, and perhaps some of those forgotten learners. The graph in the top hand right here shows you really where we had those people. So whilst we provide for the 6 trusts and the 9 agencies, we also had a number of people coming from universities, the private sector, other public services. We had people from Wales, Scotland, England, our Health Ireland colleagues, and we even had people from Australia join our webinars. So again, I suppose for us, it showed the reach that we had. We also used informal learning through our Twitter, and again, we captured some of the data from our Twitter feeds around the number of new followers. So again, even during that period in April, an increase of 88% of new followers, and this was only on our main account, not on our individual consultants, and we've 22 staff members as well. This wasn't including the new followers and the retweets and profile visits of all of our staff. This was primarily our own. So again, we knew that informally we were reaching out and getting a greater reach, and people was wanting were wanting to access some more informal learning as well. Again, just some of the feedbacks, folks, around actually people who were really experienced leaders and how much it had helped them during this period, people needing the help during the pandemic, and even new leaders saying how beneficial some of the series were to them in terms of the support that provided to them. So again, in terms of that, the key thing really for us was that actually on reflection now, for me, it's more about that curiosity and agility were critical. We needed to constantly amend our materials. As I say, all of our materials were primarily a stand-up delivery set of materials. We now had to move to this digital material, voiceovers, webinars, etc. Really a different world for us and our system, and even in terms of our centre. We had to look at different methods. So we did have to look at using different technologies, different media. We did have, I mean, again, it's even interesting, we're trying to work out, do we sit at our desk to deliver? Do we set up a room to deliver? Do we use green screens? So it was all really a learning activity for us through those first 3 months. I suppose it does, on reflection, it let us see that we could and should deliver to a more diverse audience. Perhaps we were a bit stagnant in terms of who we were providing to, our 9 to 5 service that was typically there, but this, I suppose, showed us that actually we needed to provide learning and development to a more diverse audience. We could see the greater reach in our development activities, and again, typically those hard to reach and what I've named as forgotten learners. So again, we got mentions and people contacted us about, it was great to be able to have learning, or people who were on night shift, people who were working at weekends, our community sector colleagues who maybe didn't get to stop and go to learning that often, people who were working in the community. So all of those typically hard to reach groups, or what I call forgotten learners, we recognise now that actually our reach needs to get to those people in the way ahead. We obviously did connect the system to more of itself. The virtual webinars and the virtual materials and the digital technology allowed us to connect our public service system as well as our private service system, but also across nations, as you've seen from some of the data. One of the key things for us was we had a number of digital champions. So a few of our key staff stepped up to help with taking on the role of finding out about how to best use digital technology, what were the platforms, what were the medias we could use, etc. And they were invaluable, folks, in those first few months. We did make workforce adjustments. So typically we would have, for example, taken on an HR placement student around that time. We flicked that very quickly into, we decided we'd actually employ a digital student placement instead of an HR OD placement student. So again, we started to make adjustments in our workforce. We also seen that we needed to work closely. So in the centre, we had 2 sets of consultants. We had a management and leadership development side of the house, but we also had a digital consultancy side of the house. During that period, we saw greater co-design and co-delivery between the leadership end of our business and our digital teams within our business. I suppose you also saw the importance of data, something we tell others about, but actually, again, the importance of the data and using that data to refine our services was really important. And I suppose we were in a state of future shock, a premature arrival of the future for us. So within those first 2 weeks, suddenly we had our first staff members launching webinars, delivering virtually, going on camera to deliver, which again, for all of you guys in the learning field and learners, you realize that that's not the same as standing up and delivering face-to-face with people. It's a different skill set, it's different tools, it's different techniques. And I suppose we had to get up to speed with that really, really quickly. I suppose the bottom line, and the thing that we're probably really proud of, was during that period, whilst there was no activity for probably the 6 months, because all of that material we put out as a free resource primarily, we did meet all our annual performance targets for that year. So it was a tough year for our staff, I suppose. And then I suppose moving on to so what does our future look like? We're now starting to consider, what does this look like for the centre? What does the Health and Social Care Leadership Centre look like? Whilst we're still in the middle of a pandemic, we're also thinking about post-pandemic, post-crisis, what do we need to look like? But I suppose there are still, I think, a number of challenges, and all of you guys in health and social care and learners and learning development consultants or facilitators or practitioners, you'll realise there are a number of challenges for us. Our staff in health have been running on hot for far too long. They're exhausted, they're overstretched, and sometimes learning and development is the last thing on their minds, really. We have also started to work and learn in an abnormal way. This is not a normal way of learning and development. It is one way, but it is not the same way or the way that we need to use. And again, Laurie talked about using the different technologies, and Matt, we've talked about using the different methods and how do we combine and blend those things. And again, there is a danger here where we continue to use Zoom and this two-dimensional way of working and way of learning much too much. And we don't go back to learning in a more traditional way, or having the right balance between a traditional learning face-to-face and the digital learning. So there is something about we've started to work and learn in this abnormal way. Connections have become two-dimensional. People, this way of learning and not getting in the room with everyone has become very, whilst there is a face, there is lots of information and data you can collect from a non-face-to-face learning environment. There is this tension, I think, in our system in health and social care at the minute between getting the job done and being kind and human and being social. So there is a tension between, okay, great, clap for the NHS, etc., but now get on with the job and rebuild your services, and your waiting lists are far too high, but yet be compassionate and kind with each other. So there is this real tension, I think, between getting the job done, but also taking the time out and hitting the pause button for ourselves. I think as a learning development family, we will see greater tension between business need and our sociological needs of our learners. They're already, and I suppose in my system, I'm already seeing the need for hot desking, people asking, can we not do everything in a digital way, etc. But I suppose we need to remember our staff are people. Our staff are human beings. They need social interaction. They want to be with people. And funny, we were running the program last week, and one of the key things that keeps coming out time and time again is, when can we get together? When can we see each other face to face? So there will, I think, for the learning development family, be this whole debate around cost, efficiency, effectiveness, and outcome debate. And again, Laurie talked about it already. It quite often isn't cheaper, and people think out there it's cheaper to do digital learning, and quite often it's not. And I suppose we need to allow our corporate colleagues to see some of that. We need to restore our services versus this continually growing expectations of delivering more with less, and I think that's not going to change. I think our biggest challenge for digital learning will be our infrastructure and our support in health and social care, and certainly I can only speak for Northern Ireland, but we find that we really struggle with the digital infrastructure and the support we have to support that digital learning. But I suppose our final challenge is we need to open up to the possibilities in HR and our learning family and our organisations. We need to open up to the possibilities and make sure that we are focused on that growth mindset, really. So I suppose for learning and learning development and us at the centre, the thing is to actually give ourselves the time to pause. And it's not a full stop. We're not stopping what we do, but we do need to take time out to reflect. And as I say, the opportunity to do this for you guys today has probably given me a bit of time actually to sit down and think of some of that stuff. So what are we trying to do moving forward? So anyone who's seen this from the RSA, and whilst it is about crisis response, and we've been using a lot with our service delivery, I think here at the centre we're using this same framework to consider what does our learning and development offer need to look like in the next 6, 12, 18, 5 years ahead. What are the things we've done to respond immediately in the crisis, but we need to stop doing that? What do we need to let go of? What did we stop doing during the pandemic? And actually, you know what? There's no real need to start that back up again. We can leave it there. What are the things we stopped doing, but actually we need to get back to doing? So that whole debate around face-to-face versus digital, we know we need to restart doing some of the face-to-face, but we also know we need to amplify our digital input and the amount of digital work that we do within our learning and development activities. So I suppose the reimagine for us and the centre is that we do have this whole development of a new strategy for learning. We do have to move to this, to more face-to-face and get the right blend between face-to-face and digital. So it's not, we are pushing because again, we know we're listening to our staff and our staff are saying they want to get back to face-to-face learning, but we also know that there is benefit for digital learning. We do have to use human-centered design to develop our new learning experiences. So again, Laurie and Matt have both talked about development of our learning experiences. And I suppose for me, using human-centered design and using the experience of our staff and people is really, really important for that. We need to think about when are we going to use synchronous and asynchronous learning. We need to know when we're going to use the inflow learning that Matt talked about. When do we use formal, informal and blended? When do we use courses of 5, 6, 10 months, 12 months? And when do we need to just use small bite-sized materials? So again, all of that should be driven by our users and by the experience of them. I suppose we do have to take up this technology mantle, and we do need to innovate and probably innovate with pace, because again, I would imagine a lot of the technological giants are also now, and again, we've seen so much even in terms of some of the providers, Zoom, MS Teams, etc. Even during this period, the way that they have rapidly developed and evolved over this period has been phenomenal. I would imagine there will be a lot of other organizations who are wanting to get into that space. But as learners and learning development facilitators and a learning community, I suppose we need to keep ahead of that technology and keep pace with that. I suppose we do need to think about, there are going to be greater flexibilities in the way our staff work within health and social care. So therefore we have to have greater flexibility in the ways that we give learners the ability to learn. The speed and pace, that rapid learning agility. And again, Laurie talked about we're going to need to move quicker. The roles will not be the same. The pace at which our workforce is going to develop and the pace at which new developments, new technologies, new ways of working is going to come in. So therefore, again, as a learning community and a learning family, we need to keep ahead of that. And again, I've already mentioned, I think we do need to think about some of those forgotten learners, the non-typical learners. And again, what I'm talking about there is we don't typically think about our service users and carers. We need to think about how do they learn alongside some of our staff, but also when can we learn together with other sectors, our public sector colleagues or other private sector colleagues. This gives us a greater opportunity to do some of that. I do definitely think we're going to have to do more role augmentation and redesign. I think we've already started that in the centre. We already started. We don't really apply just people who appoint people who have learning development capabilities now. They do have to have that digital versatility and that digital design in their workplace and their skill set. And I think the increased connectivity and the ability has given us the ability to co-design and co-deliver. I can co-design and co-deliver programs, courses, materials, learning materials with colleagues right across the globe now, and we can deliver them together through this virtual means. So again, there are some significant advances there in terms of how we learn. I think the role of the digital champion is going to be really important. They're going to keep the person or the people who keep us abreast of technology and the pace of technology, which then brings into the whole thing about, I think for learning, we have to continue rapidly test and retest what we're doing, check out how it's working, etc., etc. So that whole innovation improvement world is going to have to be part of our psyche in our learning and development family. Again, I think we're going to have to think of more innovative ways of learning. And again, Laurie brought into that, but I think that future shock, that premature arrival of the future is here. We did it in some ways before, but I think gamification, or artificial intelligence, or augmented reality, virtual reality, simulation, all of that type of stuff is going to become more to the fore, and we're going to have to use more and more of that technology and therefore enhance the use of new technologies. That in itself then means we have to skill escalate our facilitators. So as learning and development facilitators, we're going to have to keep on top of our game because the rapid change and the rapid pace of change within our world. I think again, that whole adult learning cycle is going to be a key part of that. I suppose the first time in the pandemic, in the first months, that disorientation, it was a bit scary, a bit frightening, and a bit disorientating, or not a bit, quite disorientating to be fair. But I think in subsequent cycles of that, We have learned that we have able to be able to grow and develop, and I think we have to use that to grow and develop. And I suppose the final part of my reimagine is that we all in our learning development communities have to keep this growth mindset. We have to be open to all of the new possibilities that this new world has brought us, really. So I suppose in summary, I suppose my key takeaways are that we have to stay curious and agile. I mean, I suppose that's the two key qualities. I think we as a learning development community and in our practice, we have to remain curious and agile during this period. I think that's what's brought it to the fore for me. The speed and the rapid pace that we moved in terms of our learning and development, I think we have to keep that going, but that will only come through having those two key skills, really. I think we can't forget, and I suppose I stress this because I was on recently on the CIPD, and I'll not spit because it's a different organisation, but our other HR colleagues, even on a CIPD conference recently, I heard about all this shift to remote working and people sitting on Zoom, etc., to learn. And I suppose my one call would be to remember that our work is still about the connection. It's still about the people. It's really, really important that we don't lose in our learning and development families the ability to connect people and on a one-to-one, face-to-face basis. So there is this real balance that we need to find between that blended approach, the face-to-face versus the digital learning, I think, and that's going to be a real challenge for us from some of our corporate colleagues. I do think we have to realise as L&D people that we also won't make the right decisions sometimes. We will mess up, but actually, you know what? That's part of it. That's part of our learning. That's part of our learning journey. That's part of our learning cycle for us. But the key thing is we need to try. And I suppose the other bit is that actually we need to start learning. And again, a bit like some of the ROI stuff and the return on expectations that Laurie talked about, we need to recognise that we are trying to do learning for all of the parts of our organisations and our system. We're trying to learn for individuals. We're trying to help the teams learn, organisations, but ultimately it's about our wider system. And our system, I'm talking about, for example, even our HPMA family, which is right across the nations. It's not just in one region or the other. And again, I'm quickly putting this up because I think we do have to remind ourselves we do need to stay in this new power space. I think the pandemic has given us a much more greater clarity on that what that looks like, that whole open source, collaboration, peer-driven, radical transparency, even the crowdsourcing. How many people can we get on this? Who's interested? Get all the interested parties. And ultimately that growth mindset is really, really critical for us. And I suppose, again, I couldn't leave this without leaving this in play. I suppose the future, it is the future for us. Learning and development is the future, but we need to make sure that we embody the creative ways, the innovative ways of how to do that. I think our environment could try to pull us back in some ways, but I think we need to be much more innovative in our practice. And again, this was the quote that was on my very first slide, because it is all about our imagination. It is all about risk taking. It is all about trying to do the right thing, but knowing that we will mess up. But let's just have the imagination and let's just take those risks and play with that imagination, really. I suppose this is one of the key learnings for me and for my team, really, during all of this. We did have to rapidly move out of that comfort zone. And I mean, within a number of weeks, we probably stayed a few days in that fear zone, but we had to move very quickly into that learning growth zone. The key thing for us as a learning community, I think over the years ahead, is to stay in that space, to try and keep in that growth zone now. We're here, we have had that future shock, and I think we need to stay in that space where we are trying to deliver, much more innovative in our learning practice. And again, I suppose for me, it all boils back down to this one slide. Sometimes the small step in the right direction ends up being the biggest step of your life. Tiptoe if you must, but take the step. And I think that's what all of this journey for me has helped me realise in terms of us as a centre, us as a region in health and social care in Northern Ireland, but also in the learning community, that we just need to take the smallest step. But actually, you know what? It's probably the biggest step we'll ever take. So I think that's about me. Thank you very much, folks, for your time, and happy to take any questions or any thoughts. Hopefully I'm on time. I thought I'd started my thing, but I'm maybe just 2 minutes, I think. Rachel, how close was that?
Well done, Will. Yeah. Thanks so much. So I'm hoping that our esteemed colleagues in the chat are going to be posting you a question or two shortly.
Okay. Yeah. Stunned silence. Or maybe it was understanding the Northern Ireland accent. Yeah, and I see Matt's put on there about the expectations on fatigued workers. I think that is it. And again, we'll be expected to do so much in such a short period of time. And back to Laurie's point about that requires us to work differently, to have different skills. And are we giving people the time to learn and develop, really? I suppose again, it is that's the fear, that we don't give people the time to restore and to learn properly. And it's pretty critical for me. And I think there is, again, one of the key points that I'm hearing constantly is this thing around, oh yeah, virtual learning is really good, and we don't have to come out, and we can do it without getting in the room, and it's less cost, and all of those things. And there is a real danger for me that some of our corporate departments will expect us to stay in this digital space for much too long. And whilst, again, that's where the human-centered bit comes in, I think our staff want us to get into face-to-face. Lauren, I suppose she's saying, have you a date for return to face-to-face? We've started part of that. So within our social distancing requirements and within our guidelines, we have started to do some face-to-face again. So that's already commenced, really. And again, that's been very much user driven, but we've had to obviously take guidance from our own Department of Health colleagues and our own HSC colleagues. But we have returned, so we have safe numbers that we can use in some of our rooms. Some of our outdoor space is being used, so we're using outdoor space more for learning and development activities as well. So yeah, we are. So we have returned. Our main, I suppose, maybe the key question, Lauren, is when do we mainly return? We're hoping to do most of our return probably, well, we probably will get it some way up to par in the next 6 months, but I would say it probably will be unlikely to be before January before we'll move fully back to potentially what we are. That's what we're hearing, but we're gonna again listen to our clients, and if they want to do face-to-face and it is within guidelines, we're going to do that, really, because we're driven by them, really. In designing our TAPE 5, did they do a learning needs analysis? Well, it wasn't mainly, it was really coming out of the research that we're finding. What were people struggling with? What we were seeing on our informal networks, I suppose. We were seeing that people were struggling with managing people remotely, managing teams remotely, how to performance manage people remotely. So that's where a lot of that came from. It was primarily from a lot of the research that we were finding, both from some of our colleagues, really, in CIBD, HPMA, our organizations, but it was also through a lot of the trends that we were seeing on social media, really. And again, being curious and brave is probably the key. What were your team's digital skills like compared to your trust staff before? Not great. And again, I don't think it was something, because again, we probably talked a lot about digital, but we probably had it in a, as I said earlier, we had a learning and development, management development team, and then we had a digital team, and digital team did the digital work, and the learning and development people did the face-to-face stuff. And I think as well as our organization, the trusts were pretty similar. We did bits of it, but not at the rapid pace that we do it now. I mean, I would say that all of our 22 staff now have significant digital skills. And again, we have very young staff members, but we've also very senior and mature staff. It was more scary for some people, and not to do with age. Some people didn't like the digital, but you know what? It is our new world, really. So we did have to do that, and it's went really well, I suppose. We're all.
I'm conscious of time, so if you've got a chance to answer any of those in the chat, perfect. If you can just jot a few notes down, I think people will be ready for a stretch break. Some great comments there. And I'm doing a session shortly on virtual learning, and I'm going to pick up some of those things that you've talked about there about, the fear factor, and it's not always the people that are not tech confident. They've got fears about everything, haven't they? Yeah.
Yeah.
Great presentation. Thank you so much, Wells.